Nothing in my life prepared me for my first sight of Arthur. What kind of life could this guy have, I thought to myself. Maybe the most merciful thing to do would be to put him out of his misery. A decade later, this reaction still shocks me. Where does such prejudice come from?
They told me that Arthur Jr. wouldn't live. They die young. They didn't know what was wrong with him, but they knew he needed help. And they didn't even have a name for cerebral palsy back then.
One of my greatest frustrations is when other people come up to me and begin to have a conversation. The very minute I try to say something, in 1984, the center flew me out to Denver to participate in something called Access Institute, put on by a group of disabled activists named ADAPT. ADAPT had demonstrated for 10 years to win accessible buses and buildings in Denver. After a week of civil disobedience, I was inspired. I loved the feeling of power and warm brotherhood that activism gave me. I began to realize that I didn't need to be changed or healed. Society did. After I got back to Louisville, I wanted to impart this to others with all my heart. At this time, TARC, the Louisville Transportation System, had only 8 lift-equipped vans to serve 5,000 disabled people. To get a ride, you had to schedule a week in advance by calling between 8 and noon on Thursdays. The ride had to be to a doctor or the kind of places that we crippled people go.
I want to make them put lifts on the buses.
We'd been lobbying TARC for 2 full years and not got anywhere, so we decided to call in help.
Representatives from a Denver-based group called ADAPT have come to town to show how their efforts changed the system in Denver.
By noon, we'd blocked 15 buses and tied up 25 blocks in the heart of downtown Louisville.
Protesters then demanded a meeting with TARC officials, and by 1 o'clock, they got it.
I'm Mike Alberger from Denver with ADAPT.
TARC General Manager Dave Arnett held negotiations with the protesters right in the middle of 5th Street.
I had worked 60 hours a week for 2 years to reach this moment. I will say in all modesty, if I hadn't pushed so hard, this never would have happened. In 1990, ADAPT descended on Washington, D.C. to push a bill through Congress that would mandate what the Constitution promises, our rights to participate fully in society.
88 now! 88 now! 88 now! 88 now! 88 now!
70 of us climbed the Capitol steps to dramatize the need for access. Later, I was one of 105 people who were arrested for refusing to leave the Capitol Rotunda until Congress recognized our civil rights into law. Six months later, I returned to Washington for the signing of the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act. I don't know what I will do with the rest of my time. I might do a one-man hunger strike to protest a single issue until I get it done. Or if this crazy man ever finishes this documentary, I might finish my book and go around the country speaking. Or I've always dreamed of starting a disability foundation. Do you think I have delusions of grandeur? Maybe so. But where would I be without my ego?
We are honored to have Mr. Arthur Campbell with us today. And I'm not sure, but he might have a word or two that he'd like to add to this, either about anything in the video or anything you've been doing since. Arthur, would you like to say anything?
Right now. You say what? Right now. Right now. Harold. Yeah. Right now, Harold. Me. Me. Right now, Harold, let him get oh, right now, Harold, let him get old. And and he doesn't and he doesn't do much. But right now, he is a chair. Right now, he's a chairperson on PAD. Yeah. Right now, he's a chairperson on PAD. Yeah. And he is thinking about putting his application for C. Right now he's thinking of putting application for his CDD. That's about all. But he sent some documents. Oh, sorry. Some community. C. M. E. Comments. Right now he sent some comments to his to Miss Harper. If we have time, he would like someone to read them. But if we don't have time, that's all right. He said thank you.
Thank you, Arthur. And I think I can read this really quickly. This is what Arthur wrote for us. I'm a plain-spoken person who always describes and tells how the circumstances and conditions truly are, and let the chips fall where they may. So when I'm advocating or writing concerning a certain disability issue that I care about, I get long-winded and I have a tendency to hammer my point home forcefully. And I care about disability history more than I can say. But Dr. Kleinert and Ms. Harp threatened me, this is a lie, with death if I had comments over 3 minutes. We still have 2 minutes to go. When I'm talking about disability history or people with disabilities, I always quote one of Sir Winston Churchill, who was a leader in England's favorite sayings, which was, if a nation or a group of individuals don't know or won't admit to their history, then this nation, group, or individual is doomed to repeat the same mistakes and conditions over and over again until some disaster comes and sweeps them off of this good earth forever. The first 38 years of my life, I lived in virtual isolation in the back bedroom of my parents' home. My parents did not keep me isolated out of meanness, cruelty, or intentionally. My isolation was done out of fear, ignorance, overprotection, and misguided love. In 1983, through circumstances beyond almost belief, and these circumstances are too numerous to go into here, I just will say that I was able to break free of this isolation, low expectations, prejudice, and bigotry, and I was able to move out into my own apartment and have been living independently, productive, satisfying, and fulfilling life ever since. There is much more to this statement, and I am going to have to cut it short because I'm under strict rules to end this segment by 1:45. However, I think that what Arthur has written is very important, and we will figure out a way to make it available to everyone who attended. And now, thank you, Arthur, so much for that. Now, we will move right on into our panel. And we are very pleased today to have Joe Cowan, Bill Dolan, and Carol Estes to talk about some challenges and strategies. But our first question for you is simply, can you tell us a little about yourself and your role or roles that you play or have played in advocacy in Kentucky? And we're going to start with Carol on this, if that's okay with you.
Sure. Just making sure you can hear me.
Very well, thank you.
Okay, hi. Well, an introduction of who I am today in 2023 is I'm an old woman, retired, living in Warsaw, Kentucky, which is in northern Kentucky on the river between Cincinnati and Louisville. I've been retired from Kentucky state government since 2012. And I think we were to say our primary roles in advocacy. And for me, in the 70s and 80s, that would be primarily employment. But I also was involved in ADA implementation in Kentucky. Once the ADA was passed in 1990, we were able to convince the Brereton Jones administration and the governor's office to establish an ADA office. And I was very involved in trying to get state agencies to comply with what the ADA said it should do. And then I was also in the group that helped establish heart-supported living. And then bringing that back to today, I am the guardian for Hannah Hart, who is Jane and Ken Hart's daughter. And I am helping administer the Ken and Jane Hart trust fund that was set up for Hannah to be able to live independently. So that's a brief introduction into who I am. And you want me to stop there, Bev?
Yes, I think that's fine. If anyone has their mic on who is not supposed to be speaking, please look and turn it off. And we're going to move on now and ask Joe Cowan. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and some of the things that you've worked on in Kentucky?
Good afternoon. My name is Joe Cowan. I'm an African-American. I use the powered wheelchair. I've worked in disability service. I've participated in advocacy for many years. I've been on several councils. I'm currently. I enjoy advocating for folks with disability as well as myself. I do a lot of personal. I've had to step up a little bit and do a little bit more personally as well as for others. And I enjoy this. I've been doing this several years now. And that's me. I live in Monticello. I'm employed at the well, I can say yes, with KCTCS Somerset Community College. I'm instructional specialist through that agency. I work on a program called Project Beam, and that's where I'm at this point.
Thanks very much, Joe. And
You're
now
welcome.
let's hear from Bill Dolan.
Thank you all for having me. Again, my name is Bill Dolan. I work at Protection and Advocacy, and a little bit about P&A. We provide legally based services to individuals with disabilities throughout the Commonwealth in all 120 counties. So if anybody has any questions or follow-ups or has a legal question that they'd like some insight on, you can always reach out to us at P&A and be happy to provide the answers, or as best as we can, at least information about your particular service. And all of our everything that we do is free too. So we don't charge anything for that. And myself too, I'm a white male. I'm getting older too. 50. How old am I? 52. That's bad. I can't remember. 52. I guess people say I look a little bit like combination of Brad Pitt and George Clooney. Yeah, that and again, if I forget, I'm also a lawyer too, so that tells you the veracity of my previous statement. But I'm real happy to be here. Again, I feel like a little bit like I came off the bench on Little League here with the panel, and I get like the 2004 something Red Sox. The people have talked or who are going to talk here, but I'll do my best to provide some information. But thank you for having me.
Thank you, Bill. Well, we have such a variety of content today that I've only brought 2 questions for the panel, and then we're going to go ahead and take questions from anyone else who would like to ask. So as people are talking, think about what else you might like to ask them, and you can go ahead and put that in the chat box if you'd like. So our question for Carol is, what kinds of challenges have you faced while doing advocacy work in Kentucky? We know change doesn't come easy. Tell us about some of the challenges that have happened with you or that you've seen.
Yeah, there have been many challenges, that's for sure. And I know that the people still working on, I'll talk about the employment arena now specifically, because that's what I was most heavily involved in the 70s. And, just a little background here, as you heard Harold reviewing some of the major things that were happening nationwide in the 70s and 80s. And a lot was happening for kids with disabilities being included in school systems. But then, what after that? And so that was a frustrating time, I think, for kids coming out of school and for their parents and loved ones in trying to find good employment opportunities. And so where I was with that was what Hank Blandford one time, and I at first I wasn't sure how to accept this label that he gave me, but he said I was an advocate on the inside. And he said what he meant by that was I was employed by a very large agency who had lots of money and were doing employment services, but perhaps needed a little tweaking and a little nudging to do things a little bit differently. So he considered me to be one of those people who might be able to make that happen. And I consider that a great compliment coming from Hank, who I would put in there with all these other people as one of our wonderful Kentucky advocates who's done so much for people with disabilities. But I was working in voc rehab. I had just come out of college, having learned from Mark Gold that we needed to try other ways. Try another way was his mantra in terms of services for people with disabilities, and to make things individualized rather than doing things as a group. And what was happening in Voc Rehab was just very traditional kinds of services where testing, traditional paper and pencil written testing, was being used to develop plans of services. And if you didn't do well on those tests, then you were more or less probably going to have a plan that led you to sheltered employment. And I won't go into definitions of that, but it's basically group employment where you're paid less than minimum wage quite often. I was just a mere vocational rehabilitation counselor. I wasn't in any kind of administrative position. I was very confused as to, well, I came out of college all excited about all these things happening, and yet in this big agency with all this money, that wasn't happening. But then I began to learn that, and so that was, I guess, in terms of challenge, that was my challenge, and that's where I was. But then I began to learn that there were some people in the state who were doing some good things. Milton Tyree, for one, was helping kids come out of school get good jobs. And before it was called supported employment or the theory or notion of job coaches, Milt was doing that. And we began to learn. I was in Northern Kentucky, he was in Louisville area, but I began to learn, this is what I want. This is what I want to see happen. And, you can fast forward a couple of years, but one of the things that did happen was that Kathy Williams, who was inside Voc Rehab, and Ricky Cook saw fit to write a grant. There was a grant coming out of OSTERS, the Office of Special Education and Rehabilitation Services, about 1985. It was a Title III systems change grant. And the idea was that it would bring into this Voc Rehab system the opportunity for people to have more than sheltered employment. Well, our barrier was that we were inside this big system. It didn't want to do that. I mean, that's just the plain and simple truth of it all. Kathy and Ricky wrote the grant, but it was not widely accepted within the agency. But within this grant that they wrote, there were training and technical assistance positions established so that those of us who took those positions, and I did, I left my Voc Rehab counseling position to take this job. And some of the names that you might recall from that first group of supported employment consultants was Dave Mathis, Barry Whaley, me, Ricky Cook, Sherry Ambrose. I'm leaving out a few, but those were our central people who decided that we were going to go out in the state and educate and help Voc Rehab understand their role in systems change. And so that's what we did. But we had no funding for direct services. So we were going to have to find some demonstration dollars in order to make that happen. So where did we look? We looked within DD Council, and we got a little bit of money there. We also looked within mental health, and Kentucky was one of the first 10 states to implement supported employment in Voc Rehab. So that was a good thing, but we didn't really go into it with a lot of support from the other agencies. Daryl Martin was over at DD Council. That may be another name that you all remember as far as leadership in our own backyard. And Rose Blandford, who's Hank's wife, but she was working in mental health. And they were two key people to get us a little bit of funding through state government, through DD Council, through mental health, the Mental Health Planning Council. And we also had some non-traditional funding that we looked at. CETA programs, you may remember CETA. I think that might have been President Nixon, maybe? I don't know. It goes way back. But it was before JTPA, which was the Job Training Partnership Act, and that was in about 1982. We used some funds from there. But breaking through into these non-traditional funding sources was another barrier for us and another challenge, because while they targeted vulnerable people, not necessarily did they target people with disabilities. And so we felt very challenged by that, but also very determined that money should be available to people with disabilities too. So I'll stop there. You know, Bev, that I could go on and on, but I'll stop there. That's just a brief synopsis.
That was incredible. A great little piece of history there. Joe, would you like to share anything about your challenges that you may have faced in advocacy work?
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Yes, I've run into several challenges as far as by advocating how, getting people to see the need of what was required. Some things for folks with disabilities or places or making accessible buildings or entrance ways and so forth. There are a lot of challenges there, or were more than they are today. But but you have to get the individuals to realize that these are needful. These things are needful for us. And I recall, if I may, a time when we were at I was on the council of P&A, and the director and some of us met down in Berea, and we went into, like a restaurant that it just had a piece of furniture at the doorway where you really couldn't, turn your wheelchair easily. And so therefore we made them aware of that, and they moved the piece of furniture out. The challenge of a lot of times is that I think that we don't speak up enough, advocate enough for just things to get people to realize that you don't have to renovate the whole building in order to make it, something accessible for folks with disability. The role is to get, our role is to, I think, as an advocate, is to get the system, folks in the system, to see that there's a need, and it doesn't, just look at what and understand what we might need and work with us on it. I'd say us, folks with disabilities.
Thank you, Joe.
You're welcome.
Bill, you're up. Oh, I'm sorry. Are you still okay?
Yeah, Bev, thank you so much. Like I said, again, I'm coming here from, I don't know if it's right field or center, whatever the worst position is for the least effective player in baseball. I think that's center or right field or something. Again, I'm going to try here, but try and do my best. But yeah, I think as far as just the barriers or obstacles or that thing to overcome. And Bev, I had enough time to reflect on this. I think you're going to regret this. Arthur is, as he mentioned, is on our PAD board, Protection and Advocacy for Individuals with Developmental Disabilities. He's the chair of that. And at P&A, we have a board of people with disabilities, and then also a council from our PAMI grant, which is Protection and Advocacy for Individuals with Mental Illness. And both the board and council guide us on what we could do on a yearly priorities. I say that to say Arthur and I see each other often, and so he's probably going to give me a hard time about this. But I was trying to think of just what folks could take away. I've been at it about a quarter century now of litigating for Kentuckians with disabilities, and through all sorts of forums, from writing letters to phone calls to federal class action litigation, kind of everything in between. And think about what you could take away maybe from my little bit of the talk today. And it's going to be what Arthur said. And maybe this will go like on a t-shirt or something, because I think it gets to the heart of what we're looking at here, or at least what I thought is where he said you had to push for it. And I think that's it seems to me over, again, these last 25 years or so, that none of those changes come about, or I shouldn't say, but very few come about because they just happened. It's always somebody saying, hey, this is wrong, or let me change this for me, and then I can change this for a whole bunch of people and change the system. And of course, so I think that's what I'd say about that part, is that there's through the years that the changes come about because clients or other people with disabilities have said to us as the P&A system, this is an issue or problem for me, and can we do about, what can we go about, how do we go about addressing that? And what Arthur said is, you have to push for that change, because it's very rare, again, that I saw, hey, we just went ahead and did this because it was like I said, Arthur had to crawl up the steps. Maria had to fight for the zoning law. It goes on. Joe, there's a table in the way. It just goes on and on about individuals then through their own advocacy fighting for change, and that results in systemic change for everybody for the better. But if individuals don't say that this is an issue for me, then and they don't push for that, that the system doesn't change. So yeah, push for it would be it. And then also the other part would be, unfortunately, that there's no finish line. That's a really hard part. I think it took me a while to get to that point, that you're you have a victory or you fight over, you battle over a particular area or whatever. Say as lawyers, it's it's us versus them system, right? So I guess that's how we think. It's sometimes we're successful, you prevail, but those successes sometimes bring new problems, or you end up going back a bit as a state or a system or a country. And it does seem, this day and age too, it's been difficult the last little bit here. Like I said, I think, and through the quarter century I've been at it, we've never had to advocate through that period of inflation that we have now. And that really impacts what we do as far as like direct support professionals trying to find help for people to stay in the community and to get services, and also then to compete in the housing market. Again, just those are some of the barriers that we currently have. And that's been a real challenge going forward. But and again, just an example, I think I saw Maria post or at least I know, kudos, again, the fight goes on in the law, and we push for changes in the law for the better for people. I think I just saw from Maria at HDI there on the transportation, that there's a regulation or rules that govern Medicaid transportation. And I think that they just had a success or working towards a success for people who need transportation to or from a Medicaid service, and making that a little bit easier for people. So again, it's been a quarter century, and things are certainly improving. But yeah, there's been a backslide a bit, I think, in the last couple of years or so, given that there's not a lot of there's a lack of, or much less services available. Not that there's not a payment source, but the people to actually provide those services, and then again the difficulties with the housing market. But again, yeah, I just end with that. Like I said, get the gong, Bev, tell me to stop talking. But I guess it would be Arthur. I'd started with Arthur there, and you have to push for it, because nobody will do those changes, I don't think, voluntarily. And I think Arthur, we probably disagree sometimes, but for sure. Oh, one other thing too about lawyer, once my brain starts going, Arthur did say at one point, I think in his video, which is awesome, it's so good. And again, Marie's valid, they're both so good. That he might have to do that hunger strike thing. Well, I was there one time when Arthur did announce that, and again, another good change that came about from that advocacy was, that, to the credit of the CHFS and DMS Department, County Health and Family Services, Department for Medicaid Services, they recently, within the last year or so, made a change. So people who actually get the home and community-based waiver, they can pay their caregivers a lot more. And that was a result of Arthur's advocacy. So yeah, so that's, but again, another one for folks, another recent change. I'll stop talking after this one because I have hundreds of examples, but where people would go to hospitals and they need acute care, that before you couldn't have your workers come with you if you're in a waiver. And now that part's been changed, but there's some problems with that, so there's steps forward, but then there's some issues that result of those changes. And I'm sorry, one more thing, help litigate Michelle P. And that was fantastic. And the whole effort, a lot of that was to get people, there's lots of people on wait list for Sports for Community Living, did Michelle P. and 10,600 people now, I think, but now there's like an 8,000 person wait list. So we worked on a wait list, on a waiver, did another waiver, and now we have way more people waiting for services, which is and I think that was addressed a little bit earlier. I think there's some legislative efforts at this point to maybe help address some of those people who are waiting for community-based services. So yeah, babe, I'll stop now. Like I said, I can talk forever, but yeah, I can't believe Arthur's just going to give me a hard time next time I see him about you have to push for it. Thank you.
He said, may he ask you something? May he say something?
Can we finish the second question for panelists first, and then we have opportunities for everyone to speak, including Arthur Campbell has a question or two in the chat box, along with the panelists who also have questions. If you wouldn't mind holding that off for just about maybe 10 more minutes.
Okay. He says okay.
All right, thank you. Okay, so that was a lot of information, Bill. And no, I would never want to stop you because everything you said was relevant and important. And now we're going to move on to the last question that I have, and that's about strategies. So Carol Estes, could you tell us a little bit about some of the strategies that you have used or that you've seen other advocates use that have been especially successful?
Yeah, and this has been kind of a fun thing for me to think back and remember what we did and how we did it and how hard it was, but yet how rewarding it was. And as I think about, I'll start with employment first because that was my main arena. We established one of the first Kentucky APSE organizations in the nation. That's I don't know what it stands for. I forget what it stands for now, but at the time it was Association for Persons in Supported Employment. And there's still Kentucky APSE today that's very active. And by having a group like that, you weren't alone. We had agency reps, we had consumers, we had employers, a whole group of people who were willing to speak up and speak out and try to help us advance what we were wanting to see done. So I think, the first thing would be join together and certainly don't compete. Now, we ran into some of that when we were more or less competing with funding that was going at the time to sheltered employment. And we wanted some of that. And so we were competing with the same agencies that we were trying to encourage to change to integrated employment. So don't ever say or think that just because there's going to be some controversy that you should back away, because we didn't. And, we made a lot of progress. There's still a long way to go with that. One of the things that I know, even though I'm retired, I keep up with a few things, is that we're still trying to get that special minimum wage thing changed, revoked, whatever, and it'll come up and people will advocate and then nothing has happened yet. But that's just really unfair, the way that it was designed way back when, and it's still effective today. I think as I remember us working on the supported living, now I was not at the forefront of that, but I was certainly right in the middle of it. Because even though my main arena was employment, well, if you have a job, there's so many other things that go into having a good life than a job. A job can certainly get that started, but we needed supported living and we needed flexible funding other than Medicaid to be able to help people reach their goals and objectives, especially after they got a job or at the same time that they were looking for a job. So we really needed to understand that we had to work together on all of these issues. There was health care, there was health insurance, and while I would have preferred to stay in my own little area of expertise, I really needed to get involved with all of it. And as I think back to the supported living efforts, it was a fun time. A lot of meetings were held in Jane Hart's kitchen. Around her kitchen table, just talking about what we wanted to see happen, dreaming dreams, and just hoping that we might be able to make some of that come to fruition. And then in terms of what I was talking about earlier about the Governor Brereton Jones administration. And I think what I would say to people about that is, here we had the governor of Kentucky. And I remember our first meeting when we were going to approach Governor Jones about establishing a office of the ADA in the Capitol building. And when we went over there, in our minds was, well, what's going to be our plan B? We're going to need a plan B because he's probably going to say no to establishing an ADA office in the Capitol. And so, you know, we talked a lot about that. What would be our plan B? And then when we approached him and Libby, his wife, they were very open and wanted this to happen. And so we were successful. And sometimes you get surprised by success. And we were able to capitalize on that and move on. Those are just some of the highlights. I'll give the floor to the other panelists.
Great stories. Thank you, Carrie.